Big Cypress National Preserve was born. Now, one of the things that makes Big Cypress National Preserve so special, so unique as a National Park Service unit, is that unlike our national parks, it's a preserve. You can do things like go hunting, ride ATVs or off-road vehicles, swamp buggies. You can own private land. There's even some oil and gas drilling that happens there, and there's a few cattle leases left. Also, if you're Seminole or Miccosukee, you can still use the preserve for traditional activities. Despite all these different uses and user groups that we are providing for, above all comes protecting and managing that watershed. Even the ground beneath our feet here was formed by water. Now, for those of you who are geologically inclined, you know that the Earth did not always look the way that it does today. Continents have moved, shifted, the sea level has risen and fallen. And at many times throughout history, the land that we now know as Florida, the land that we live on now, has actually been under water. Now this map, the way it's representing, is green is land, of course. This light blue area represents a shallow sea. Has anyone here ever been snorkeling? A few people? Hannah has. When you went snorkeling, what did you see out there?
Fish.
Fish? Just fish? Just fish floating around?
And reefs.
Reefs. Coral reefs. Coral reefs and all the marine life, the fish, the crustaceans, all the things that they bring in. Now you know that we can't have things living without things dying. And there was a lot of things out there. As they died, their bodies fell and piled and piled and piled. Over time, there were so many of these and so much weight that they began to compact. Sometimes that sea level would lower again, and these would be exposed to the drying sun and the atmosphere. Over time, all these different processes acted on those particles until they actually hardened into a type of rock called limestone. And there's an example of a piece of limestone, and you can see even all those little particles. It looks like we have some shells up there. All that marine life, plus the sediments that were coming in from the north. Now when you take a walk out at Big Cypress, you might even see some of that limestone poking up from the soil out there. That is making up the land right underneath our feet. Now limestone, if you're not too familiar with it, is very, very easily eroded. And one of the main agents of erosion on limestone is rain. Just simple rain. Believe it or not, all rain that falls from the sky is just slightly acidic. Not acidic enough to hurt us if it gets on your skin, but over time, enough of it falling onto those rocks, maybe forming little pools, begin to eat away at that precious limestone. Over time, it developed solution holes, and you can see one right there, just a perfect little round hole in the rock. Now, as these holes got bigger and bigger, they began to collect not just rain, but other sediments, little bits of rock, maybe soil, maybe organic matter, maybe seeds. Maybe a seed from a cypress tree blew into one of those solution holes. You ever been in a city or a place that's a little more built up? And you've seen where they built a sidewalk or an asphalt road too close to a tree, and something like this happens. As that tree grows bigger and bigger and bigger, its roots go bigger and stronger, and eventually they're just going to break right through that concrete or that asphalt. Or in the case of Big Cypress, they're going to break right through that limestone. Over time, enough trees in one place broke out enough area of limestone that water began to pool up, soil began to pool up, other plants were able to take root in that deep soil. And over time, an ecosystem takes root right there. Now, taking a look at this picture, which is inside one of our cypress strands out there in the preserve, what can you pick out about this? Give me some descriptors about this photo here.
It's green.
Very green. Lots and lots of plant life.
Very fresh with life.
Very fresh with life, yeah. More life there than you'll see in a lot of ecosystems that you might visit.
Wet.
Very, very wet. You can see right here, there is not 1 inch of dry ground. Anything else?
Shaded? Did somebody say shaded?
No, no one said shaded, but it is absolutely shaded. Those cypress trees growing up are forming a canopy, a shelter for all those things growing underneath them. And let's take a closer look at all those things that are growing right here in our cypress strand. Starting with cypress trees, because after all, they really are the defining plant out there, the defining thing out there. Has anyone ever tried to grow a cypress tree at their house at home? You have?
Sure.
Did it work out?
Yes.
Yes. Did you have to water it a lot?
Initially.
Initially, yep. What I found in looking into this was that for cypress trees to take root, they actually have to have a period of complete saturation by water and then a period of dry down. What happens here in Florida throughout the year?
Very, very wet.
Very, very wet in the summer, very, very dry in the winter. A perfect little nursery for these cypress trees to start growing up. And once they do grow up, everything about them points to their existence out here in the water. Has anyone here ever ventured away from our little home in Naples, gone to the big city, ridden a subway or a public bus? Yeah, some of you are nodding. When those seats were all filled up and you had to stand in the aisle, did you just stand straight and tall with your arms by your side, trying not to touch anyone around you?
Mm-hmm.
Dave's shaking his head. How did you stand there? Did you just...
Well, he was trying to touch people around him.
You gotta spread your feet out.
Yeah.
You got to spread your feet out for balance, get a good strong stance, and then you said you might even reach out and grab onto those bars around you. And when I look at the cypress, that is exactly what comes to mind to me here. Not only is Florida a land of extremes when it comes to water, but also when it comes to weather. What happens here in August, September? Hurricanes come through. Very, very high winds. Now, if you're a big old 200-foot tall tree sitting in water and loose, fully saturated soil, do you even have a chance when that hurricane comes spinning through your backyard? No, not a prayer. So they take that nice, wide stance to get ready for it. Then they also have these knees over here. And Dave also mentioned reaching over and grabbing those bars. And I like to think of those knees acting just like that. When they take a really big bump, maybe they go over a curb, driver quit paying attention, they can just reach out and grab on for a little bit more support. Now, has anyone here ever lived in a really, really big city? I don't mean Naples or Fort Lauderdale. I mean like New York City, Chicago. Yeah, you're nodding your head. Did you live right downtown?
Well, no, but I lived in the suburb of D.C.
Okay, you lived around it. So what do people who live in these big downtown areas like that, what do they live in?
Small apartment.
Small apartments? Are they just spread out? No. Spread out. They spread out. I went to New York City for the first time last winter, and I was astounded when I stepped out of that cab to just look up and feel so tiny among all those skyscrapers. And I thought, why in the world do they do this? They're ruining the view. And they all thought it was a great view, but I thought, you've ruined it. I can't see the sky. I can't see anything except concrete and windows. And then I realized those were people's homes I was looking at. In places like New York or big cities like that, space, horizontal ground space, comes at a premium. And so they build up. Here's a plant that's taking advantage of that out there in the swamp. Dry ground space out there is at a premium. You saw how wet that photo of the strand was. So these guys are air plants. They've grown right up on the cypress trees, taking hold on a branch or right around the trunk even. Now what I think is really unique about air plants is that even though they've based their life on getting up and away from that water, they end up acting as their own little well, storing water. Now that water right there might attract some other little creatures. We have our little green tree frog here. Now this little frog, he's going to be lost in that big sea of swamp if he's down in that main area. But if he comes right up into a little pool of water, gets funneled in by those leaves, he has a great little protected home. He has a private hot tub just for him. Of course, he's not the only one interested in that. Or I should say, there are other animals interested in him. And in this picture, you can see a king snake working his way up into the air plant right there. I like to think that was pretty much just an all-you-can-eat buffet for him, laid right up there on the side of that cypress tree. Now, next time you're out in a cypress strand, and you see an air plant that looks a little bit different from the others, don't just think that it's runty or that it's stunted. Take a closer look, because chances are you have stumbled upon one of our orchids. Now, orchids belong to one of the largest plant families in the world. And yet, we usually think of them as being kind of rare, kind of special if you stumble upon one out there in the swamp. America doesn't have as many orchids as most of the other countries in the world. And I like to think it's because orchids, though they can grow through a variety of habitat types, pretty much anything except glaciers, most of them, especially your big showy ones, are growing in the tropics, in areas of high heat and high humidity. Those cypress strands make a perfect home for these orchids to live. Not only do they have plenty of water below them, but that water is moderating the air above them. I think Bob said that there's a lot of shade in there. It's a lot of shade. It's almost like being in an air conditioner in there. Very climate controlled. You've got that shade blocking the hot sun, but you've also got that water putting moisture into the air. Perfect habitat for these orchids to grow. And finally, no discussion of the swamp would be complete without touching on the alligator. When you come to visit Florida, that's usually one of the first things on people's mind. I want to see an alligator. And just like our cypress trees, these alligators are perfectly adapted to a life within the water. Look at that big strong tail to propel them through it. Eyes on the top of their head so they can just put their head right below the surface and see what's above them. Webbed feet. They even have a third eyelid to help them see underwater. Now, not only are they perfectly adapted to live in water, but they really don't have an option. Remember that we're mammals, which makes us warm-blooded, but alligators are reptiles. They're cold-blooded. They can't regulate their own temperature. Now, here in Florida, it's pretty warm in the summertime, but occasionally in the winter, it might drop a little bit. Have any of you ever gone to a beach in the summer to cool off and gone back in the winter to the exact same spot? What was it like getting into that water?
Cold.
It was cold?
In the winter it's cold.
In the winter it might be cold. When I was very, very young, my mom took me on a trip to South Padre Island. I'm from Texas, so it was a trip, but it wasn't too far. We could do it in a weekend. And I thought, she is crazy taking me to the beach in February. This is a ridiculous idea. But when I got there, little did I know that even though the air was cold, that water would actually be warmer than the air. Huge bodies of water, like oceans, or like those big, the big swamp, they can't change as fast as the air around them. So when that temperature drops abruptly, the water is still going to be much more comfortable temperature for them. And by staying in it, they can avoid those extreme changes and fluctuations. Now, not only do the alligators need the swamp to survive, but I like to think that the swamp needs those alligators out there. During our winter dry down, you might notice that these cypress trees, you can see where they had that water level earlier. Now it's dropped down. The only water out there is in this one pool down here in the corner. If you're a big animal like the alligator, and you simply can't survive without water surrounding your body, you're sure going to make an effort to find some. Even a tiny pool, even a small puddle or depression is enough. And I like to think of that alligator coming upon that little puddle and being so overjoyed to have some water that he just goes crazy. He rolls around, he thrashes about, and the next thing you know, he's cleared that puddle into a much larger hole. He's cleared out sediment, he's cleared out vegetation. Over enough years and enough gators coming back to that same hole, they've created a whole little pond. Now, this is great news if you're a gator, but what if you're a little animal like a fish or a turtle, and you would never be strong enough to make your own pond, and you stumble upon a gator hole? You found your salvation for the dry season. And what if you're a water bird, one of those birds that comes along and likes to munch on those things like fish and turtles and baby alligators? You just stumbled upon the all-you-can-eat buffet of the swamp. Now, we've only touched on a few species. There's countless others that use water as part of their strategy out here. 72 species of reptiles and amphibians, approximately 200 birds, and many of them are our wading birds, our shorebirds, who get pretty much all their food right out of that water. 37 mammals and over 1,000 plants. That is a huge number. And there's one species we haven't even touched on yet.